Now, I've told you something before, but I think it's one of those things that's worth repeating multiple times. And simply this, that the men and women who brought us the Bible, it's going to be one of those days, I think. The men and women who brought us the story of the Bible weren't strangers to adversity. In fact, when you read through the Bible, through read the stories, it's like adversity is kind of the regular part of life, right? And sometimes I think we as Americans forget that in a lot of places in this world, adversity is a regular part of life. And we wonder, we can't quite understand why that is and how that would be to have it that way. But it's important for us to be reminded that the people who brought us the Bible, right, and the stories of the Bible weren't strangers to adversity. In fact, they tended to view life through a lens of purpose and faith. And in spite of all the adversity that was going through, they still felt that there was a purpose, a plan to what was going on. And they viewed it through an idea of faith that God was behind all this, that God had a purpose in what was happening. And secondly, that they were to trust that God was doing something. Even when, or maybe especially when, it didn't seem like he was doing anything. And some of us can relate to that, right? But here's the reality is we read story after story of these people who knew what adversity was like and experienced it as a regular part of life. We begin to know something that often it's in the context of adversity that God shows up. Story after story of the Bible kind of has that way. And the reality is we don't always recognize it. But it happens. And what if that's true for us? What if even right now and whatever you're going through, you're like, Mike's saying he's supposed to show up. Why isn't he showing up? What if he's already showed up and you just haven't recognized it? So today we're going to look at what's called the Exodus, this backstory to this great event that happened thousands of years ago, that God comes along and he rescues what he calls his people out of 400 years of slavery in Egypt. But even backstory farther back to that, at the very beginning, God decides that Abraham's going to be his guy. And he comes to Abraham and says, Abraham, you're my guy. Your wife's my girl. You guys, I'm going to build a great nation out of you too. Which is kind of funny if you don't know the story, because Abraham and his wife Sarah are like 90 years old at this point, and they don't have any kids. Which you can imagine if you're that old and somebody says, you're going to have a baby, it's like, yeah, right. That's not how biology works. It's just not going to work that way. But God says, this is going to happen. I'm going to build this great nation. In fact, all the nations of the world are going to be blessed through your offspring. And lo and behold, his wife gets pregnant and has a baby. There's some sidetracks, and if you read the story, it's a great story, not of faith necessarily, but of trying to work out what they thought God's plan was, and they took things in their own hands. And it reminds us again that when we take things in our own hands, things don't always go so good. But they go through and they have a son, Isaac. Isaac has a couple of kids. He has one son named Jacob, another one named Esau. There's this whole battle between them. You ought to read these stories. They're interesting insights into, if you think your family's messed up, you ought to go read some of the stories in the Bible of messed up families. But they ultimately have a kid named Jacob, and he has a bunch of kids, a bunch of sons, and one of his sons is by the name of Joseph. And Joseph is the brat of the family, the one that all of his brothers can't stand because he's just that kid. So his brothers decide they've had enough. They get rid of him. They sell him to some slave traders, because that's how you take care of a brother who's a pain. The slave traders take him to Egypt. They sell him off to a rich guy there, rich family. Joseph does a great job for them, and then the wife accuses him of trying to molest her, and it goes bad for Joseph. He gets thrown in prison. Joseph does a great job there. He gets, he ultimately ends up getting out of there. He becomes a really important person in the Egyptian government. And then, there's this huge famine over that region of the world. And so Joseph is given permission to have his family, his extended family, his brothers, and his dad to come and live there in Egypt. And so this group of boys and their wives and their kids, they move there with the animals, and they take up residence in Egypt, and it's all good until it isn't. Immigration is all good until people think it isn't. And then it's like when it gets out of hand, they're doing too well. They're growing too large. And when immigrant population grows too large, people get a little uncomfortable. And they do stuff. Again, we're talking about thousands of years ago now. Just so we're clear, all right? So they decide the answer to this is, we're going to make all these people, because they're getting too big, we're going to make them slaves. We're going to work them so hard that they're just too tired to mess around and have more kids. right? That's the idea, but that doesn't seem to work. And the population grows. It's some on the low side, they say it's like 1 million people. On the high side, they say it's like 4 million people. It's a mess of people. And that has threatened them. And so they just make them slaves, make them work harder and harder and harder. And finally, after years and years, God says, okay, I'm going to do something. And he gets this guy, Moses, and this is a whole other story that pops up now, because another thing they start doing is start killing off the boys, because they figure if there's no boys, they're not going to keep producing. And so Moses is put in the water in a little basket, and one of Pharaoh's daughters finds the baby and can't bring it in herself to take the baby and let the soldiers kill it. So she takes the baby as her own, raises him as his own. And he goes up the ranks. He becomes, part of the aristocratic society there. And then he makes a decision when he's 40 years old to step in and fix what he sees as a wrong. Somebody dies. He has to run. 40 years he spends herding sheep in the desert, which has to be a really unexciting. I mean, you go from luxury, whatever you think is luxury spot, now you're out in the desert, and all you got is sheep around you. But God decides he's the guy that's going to lead his people out of Egypt. And so he calls them. There's a whole backstory of how that happens, and Moses is real reticent at the start. Finally, he agrees, he goes, and there's this discussion between him and Pharaoh, who he knows, right? And it's like, hey, let my people go. And Pharaoh's like, I thought we were your people. And he's like, no, these are my people. All the slaves are my people. And so there's this whole thing. There's these bunch of miraculous things that happen where God keeps raising the bar and Pharaoh keeps answering back. And so they keep putting more and more pressure, more and more tariffs and structures like that, bad stuff. Sanctions, and so they get to the spot where, finally Pharaoh says, enough. I can't say, enough of the killing, enough of all that. Just go, just get out of here and go. And so they go, and they come up, they find themselves caught because around them is all these mountains, and on this side is this big sea, what they call it, a big, body of water, and behind them are now the Egyptian army. And that's where we're going to pick up the story today. I don't know why that wasn't up there. All right, here. When the Israelites saw the king and his army coming after them, they were very frightened. And they did what people do when they're afraid. They cry to God for help, right? Even if you're not religious, sometimes like, God, if you're there, help me, right? Help. That's one of those great prayers that is often said is the prayer that God always answers when we cry for help. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but it is a very common thing for people to cry out for help. But in their crying out to help, I want you to notice what they do. They don't just cry for God to help us because we're not, we're in trouble. We can't fight. We've been slaves, right? We don't have the tools. Here comes this big army after us. And so in this moment, they say to Moses, the guy who's leading them out, what have you done to us? Why did you bring us out of Egypt to die in this desert? Why would you do that? Why would you just let us stay there and die? Why would you mess stuff up? Because things were so good, right? But it's that reminder that, isn't it true that in those moments of where we get fearful, that we all sometimes think back to how things were and not always in the clearest sight. I mean, they said to them, did we not tell you in Egypt, let us alone, and we will stay and serve in Egypt? I love this line because there's nowhere in the story does it say that they actually said that. But it's so true of us as human beings, isn't it? I mean, haven't you retold a story about something and you've kind of expanded it a little bit, embellished it a little bit? You said some of the things that you now wish you had said or thought in the moment to say, but didn't feel, strong enough to say. You kind of go back and change the story so you kind of look a little better. So now they're kind of saying, hey, didn't we say leave us here? Nobody was saying leave us. They wanted to get out. This was the chance to break free from 400 years of slavery, generation after generation. And now they conclude as the army gets closer, simply now, we will die in the desert. We're lost. It's your fault, Moses. Should have left us alone. At least we'd be alive. Now we're going to die here in the desert. But Moses, we're told, answers them. And he says, calm down. Don't be afraid, which is like a little late to say that, Moses. They're past being, they saw, as soon as you saw the Egyptians coming, you should have said, don't be afraid. But they're afraid. He said, don't be afraid. Stand still, and you will see the Lord save you today. Don't move, just watch. You will never see these Egyptians again after today. You might see some Egyptians, but not this particular group of Egyptians, because they're not going to be around. You only need to remain calm, to remain still, and the Lord will fight for you. And if you read the story of the Exodus, you begin to notice a pattern. And it's this, that God provided a way. Multiple times God provides this way. He provides a way out. He provides a way through. He provides an answer to what they're facing at the moment. And it begins to become a pattern that they will experience for the next, 40 years. So now they've gone out. This is about 45 days after felt like they were trapped there at the Red Sea, and then, this miraculous thing, God parts the waters. They get to go through on dry land, and then the soldiers chase them, and the water comes over and wipes them all out. So about 45 days later, they've come to a resting spot, and here's what they say. The children of Israel said to them, to the leaders, "It would have been better if the hand of the Lord had killed us in the land of Egypt." It would have been better if we had died back there. Remember we were kind of saying, should have let us die in Egypt? Right at that edge when they were attacking, you should have let us die there. It would have been better for that. Because here's the reason why it would have been better. There we had meat to eat and bread, all the bread we wanted. We were at least fed. But you, and again, kind of pointing at Moses, but you have brought us into this desert, into this wilderness, to starve us to death. It's you again, Moses. Moses becomes the focal point of all their complaining. And in the middle of their grumbling, their complaining, and the uncertainty, God provided again. He sends a bunch of quail so they can have some meat, and he drops down this stuff from the sky. It's like these little, maybe looks sort of like cornflakes, some kind of flaky stuff, and that becomes the source for what they're going to put to make bread out of it. It's called manna, which literally translated is, what is it? Because they weren't sure what it is, but God is providing them. Maybe it's not the fresh baked loaves of bread that they were used to, but God had provided for them. And I think it's a great reminder that in the moment of worry, we forget God's past faithfulness, and we end up going places we have no business going. And we've done that, right? In the moment, it's like we kind of forget all the stuff that God's done before, and in this moment, it's like, what's he doing now? Why isn't he doing something now? So then it's another few weeks later, and now they're camping at Rephidim. But there was no water there for the people to drink, which shouldn't be surprising because they were out in a desert, right? I mean, not rocket. I mean, if you go to the desert, you're not going to find like water all over the place, but there's no water there. So here's what they do. They begin to quarrel. They begin to accuse Moses of what's going on here. And they said, Moses, give us something to drink. Give us water to drink. To which Moses, I love Moses' response. He's like, why are you calling on me? I mean, you think I can make water just appear? I mean, come on. Why are you putting the Lord to test? I mean, God's already shown up multiple times all the stuff he did back in Egypt to get you free, what he did there at the Red Sea, what he did just a few weeks ago, right, when he gave you all the food you wanted. But that doesn't calm them down. They're not convinced about how God's been providing for them. And here's what they say. They say to us, why? Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Was it to kill? Was it to kill our children and our farm animals with thirst? I mean, did you bring out here for us to choke to death? To which Moses does what somebody in his situation would do. He cries to the Lord. He prays to the Lord. Right? He cries out to God, what can I do with these people? Which begins another sort of subplot that will carry on for the next 40 years of Moses getting to points where he gets frustrated with these people, and then moments where it seems like God's gotten frustrated with the people, which causes Moses to sort of calm God down. It's kind of an interesting dynamic there. It looks like God's come down, but maybe just the idea that God is kind of developing something in Moses. Because Moses is like, what do you do with people that are just, nothing's ever good enough? It's a reminder again that when we focus on our complaints, it's easy. It's so easy to miss what God's doing. Some of us are just wired that, right? I've told you before, I am by nature a sarcastic, cynical pessimist. I'm a lot of fun to be around. But thankfully, through God's grace, God has helped shape a lot of that. But what I've discovered is when I get around certain people that I've known for a long, long time, and they're kind of critical people, it is so easy just to fall back in that spot. Because what I've learned over the years, it's not hard to be critical, not hard to complain. Because there's always something to complain about. What's really hard to do is to figure out solutions and figure out better ways to make things work. Mark Manson, who's an author, wrote this. He said, people get addicted to feeling offended all the time because it gives them a high. There's a payoff to it, right? If there's something that happens in them that makes them feel good about feeling offended and complaining. Being self-righteous and morally superior feels good. And if you've ever been one of those things, self-righteous or morally superior, you know it does feel good, right? Because we're right, which means everybody's wrong. That's exactly right. I remember years ago hearing a preacher say that we do our best sinning when we're right. Because there's something in us, like when we feel like we got the moral high ground, that we're the good ones, we kind of justify all the stuff that comes out. And what if our complaining can cause us to miss what God wants us to see, experience, and understand? What if that's actually damaging to us? Because here's, again, part of the story back in Exodus. Every single time God shows up and provided. To which, may have been like, feeding the complainers. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, and maybe it's like, well, that's why every time we complain, God's gonna come through, so we're just gonna keep complaining. But that's not the purpose of it. God was trying to do something. God was trying to teach them trust and dependence. Which, let's be honest, it was hard for them, and it's hard for us too. So I had to trust God when it's like what we think we need, what we ought to be having isn't happening, and to be dependent on him, that he will make a way. It's a reminder of this great idea that some things can only be learned in a desert. Some things can only be learned when when things are scarce, when things are tough, right? When I think of my life, there's been portions of life where things are really tough. There's a lot of lessons that I learned out of that I haven't learned in those moments when life wasn't that way. But our problem with this statement, that some things can only be learned in a desert, is this. As soon as possible. And here's the crazy thing, back to the Exodus story. Here's the crazy thing of this whole thing. The author of Deuteronomy writes it this way. The trip from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea on the Mount Seir road takes 11 days. The trip for these folks coming out of Egypt to the promised land should have taken, about less than 2 weeks. And if you're familiar with the story, you know how long it took, right? It took 40 years. Talk about dead ends and detours. 11 days to 40 years. And the question has to be why, right? Because here's the reality. Dead ends and detours, the desert always feels like a waste of time. You've been driving someplace, you turn down the road, it's a dead end, they've blocked off the road. Now it's a detour, and it's like, it's gonna take me longer. You just get frustrated, right? And it feels like it's a waste of time. But the reality is we couldn't get to our destination without them. Because if the road's blocked off, you can't go through it anyways. We don't always see it that way, but it is always that way. So now after, I think at this point it's after 2 years, actually it's a year and 9 months after leaving Egypt, they get to the edge of the promised land. And so now they're like, after all this time, which should take 11 days, taking us almost 2 years, we're here. And there's where we pick up the story. It says, the Lord says to Moses, all right, Moses, here's what you need to do. You need to send some men over to explore, to spy on the land of Canaan. This is the promised land I'm giving you. So send some spies. In fact, pick 12 of them. You get one from each of the tribes because that's how they're broken up. They had different tribes. Get 12, so everybody has a representation. Send them all in there. And when they come back, have them tell you, what it looks like. Have them tell you that it's everything, see if everything I've told you about it is going to be true. So they come back from being on this trip. It's like a month and a half. They're out there. They show back up. They're ready to make this report. And they report this to Moses. They say, Moses, we went to the land. Went into the land. And the amazing thing is, it's a fertile land. It's the little language is, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. Which, by the way, isn't literal. It's one of those reminders that not everything, always time we read the Bible isn't always literal, right? Because it wasn't like, rivers of milk and honey, which would be kind of fun and sweet, but is not what was happening. It's just this idea that it's so fertile, it's just overflowing with everything. It is a great place to be. But, which we know how buts work. Buts are always like, but hold on here, right? But we got some other information that just kind of changed things, right? It's kind of that you can almost feel the brakes getting pumped to slow this thing down, because this is a great place to go. But Moses, the people who live there, they're strong. Not necessarily muscular strong, they're just strong. They are big, they're well equipped, they're well protected. And their cities are walled and very large. This isn't going to be like an easy thing to get it to. I mean, it's not like just some villages someplace. We got to go through through these walls somehow. And so everybody gets worked up by this report that comes back that it's a great place, but the cost of going to this great place is way, way, way too high. But there's two guys that have gone on this investigative journey that come back and are like, no, we think we can do this. In fact, one of them is a guy by the name of Caleb, and the story picks up there. It says, Caleb tells the people around Moses to be quiet, because apparently they were kind of giving Moses the business. What do you do? Again, about, why did you bring us out here? Did you take us all this time? Blah, blah, blah. They're going on. Caleb's like, shh, quiet down, hold on. And he says to them this. He says, we should certainly go up and take the land for ourselves, because we can certainly do it. And when he says that, he's not talking about, I got faith that all of us are strong enough, smart enough to figure this out. But he's pointing out that we can do this because God's going to make this work for us. I mean, God's been providing all this time, folks. There's no reason we should have got out of Egypt in the first place. There's no reason we should have gotten, through the Red Sea, because that doesn't happen. But the other men, the 10 of the other men who had gone with him said, no, we can't attack these people. They're stronger than we are. Come on, Caleb. They're so much bigger, stronger. We can't do this. And it's a reminder that it's so easy to let fear control us. We've all had those moments when it's like fear has kept us from saying that thing, doing that thing, walking up into something or walking away from something. It's so easy to let fear control us to find a reason not to. And we have a great system of justification and things we tell ourselves in order, somebody needs to be alive so they can use the phone, right? And it's so easy to find something to complain about. Begin to complain about Moses and his leadership and, why this has all happened again. And then the story picks up again, and it says, that night, because the word has gotten out to all the people now, this 1 million+ people. That night, all the people in the camp begin crying loudly. Now you can imagine having 1 million people crying loudly, right? Whether this is wailing, whether this is kind of this, kind of hysterics, I don't know, but it's just kind of it's got to be this crazy scene. And here's what they're saying as they're making this huge noise. We wish we had died in Egypt or in this desert. Now they've expanded it, right? It used to be just Egypt. Now it's or this says we were sometime in the last, less than 2 years, we had just died. I mean, why? Why is the Lord bringing us to this land to be killed with swords? First it was we were getting killed by the Egyptians. Didn't happen. Then it was we're gonna die of starvation. Didn't happen. God provided. Or then we're gonna die of thirst. Didn't happen. God provided, right? In fact, not only did he provides this cloud at the day to keep the hot heat from burning them up out in the desert, and at night he leaves that cloud and it kind of warms them because the temperature drops so low at a desert at night. God has been providing all this stuff. But now, has he brought us here to be killed with swords? I mean, and here's their fear. Our wives and our children are going to be taken away. They're going to be plundered and bad stuff's going to happen to them. We would be better off going back to Egypt, which seems like an option that has long, 2 years ago was done away with, right? Because you're not going back to Egypt now. And now God speaks up. And God kind of does the Moses thing. He says to Moses, listen, Moses, how long will these people ignore me? How long are they going to despise me? Because God seems to be taking this personally. How long do I have to put up with this? How long will they not believe me in spite of the signs, in spite of the miracles I have done among them? And when we start counting them off, the flies, the frogs, the deaths back in Egypt, Red Sea. I mean, we can go on, the manna, the water, the cloud, the protection. There's another time when God tells them, listen, folks, for 40 years you've been out here and none of your clothes have worn out and none of your shoes have worn out, which some of you ladies are thinking, that's terrible. Because how can you wear the same outfit for 40 years? But it's a whole different thing. But his point is, nothing wore out. Again, I provided something miraculous. You've had everything you needed for food and water. How long are they going to despise me and not believe me? In fact, he says to Moses, listen, Moses, get out of the way. I'm going to strike them with disease and get rid of them. I'm going to disinherit them. They're not going to be my children. Just get out of the way, Moses. But Moses, here's the good news. I will make you into a great nation that will be stronger than they are. So my plan's still going to work out, Moses. Just get out of the way. Let me get at them. Which again, I think is a way for God to sort of nudge Moses into a leadership characteristic. Because now here's what Moses says back to God. He says to God, the Egyptians, God, listen to this. The Egyptians are going to hear about this, right? These people that, we've gotten away from, that you helped us get away from, that we've overcome, you've already destroyed so much of they're going to hear about this. And if you put these people to death all at once, the nations who have heard about your power will say some stuff. They're going to hear this and they're going to go, oh, he just brought them out there to massacre him, right? The Lord was not able to bring them into the land he promised. They're going to say about you, God, that you weren't able to accomplish what your plan was. In fact, they're going to say you weren't able to plan. So here's what you did. You slaughtered them in the desert because they weren't fitting into your plan, and so you just wiped them out. So God, here's my appeal to you. So show your strength now. Show your internal strength now, right? Show your character now, God. Do what you said, that you were going to bring us from there into there. By your great love, your loyalty, forgive these people's sin, just as you have forgiven them from the time they left Egypt until now. Because God, I know this people, right? I've been talking about them to you for a long, long time, but it's like, you've been forgiving them for a long, long time. Just asking you to do it again. Not necessarily give them a break, but just forgive them. Because they have needed that over and over and over again. To which we're told that God responds in this. He says, listen, Moses, all right, I've forgiven them. I have forgiven them as you asked. But, because sometimes God even has buts, but not one of them will see the land I promised to their ancestors. And when God says this to Moses, he reminds us of something that for some of us is hard to get our minds around. And that's simply this, that forgiveness doesn't mean no consequences. Sometimes we get frustrated about it. You forgive me, so that doesn't mean if I'm free. No. God even says, listen, I forgive them, but there are consequences. There are consequences to those things when we've done stuff. So God says, listen, here's the consequence. No one who rejected, who despised me, will see that land. And then he talks to the people. And when he talks to them, he says something in a way that captures their greatest fear, right? One of their fears was, right, here, we can't go in this land because, they're going to take our wives away. They're going to take our kids away. We don't want something to happen to our wives and our kids, God. Why would we go in there and risk all that? So God says, listen, you said that your children would be taken away. That was your fear. That was what you expressed, right? That they would be taken away, that they'd be plundered. But here's the good news for you. I will bring them into the land to enjoy what you refused. I'm going to honor your, make sure your fear doesn't take place. That something bad's going to happen to your kids. In fact, your kids are going to be shepherds here for 40 years. They're going to wander out. There's going to be a price to this. And they're going to happen that way because you were unfaithful. Because you were unfaithful, they will suffer until the last of your bodies die in the desert, in the wilderness. Now, it sounds kind of like that's kind of a bad ending, Mike. I mean, doesn't God change his mind? Doesn't he forgive them and just everything's great? But God's like, no, I brought them this far, and at this point, they haven't figured this out. But I'm still going to be merciful to them because I'm not going to wipe them all out at this moment and take them in. I'm going to give them another 40 years with their families, with their kids. See their kids grow up, maybe to have grandkids, to know that I'm going to take care of their kids because I made a promise to get this people there. And it reminds us again that when we've messed up, and we've all messed up at times, that we ought to do those things. And what I'm going to tell you right now is nothing's going to shock you. Nobody's going to go, oh, Mike, how did you come up with that stuff? This is stuff that you've probably heard from when you were a kid. If you didn't, I'm sorry, because you should have heard it from when you were a kid. But when you messed up, here's what you need to do. You need to own up. I would have said man up, but that would have got me in trouble. So own up. You need to accept responsibility, and you need to be accountable. Again, nothing that none of us have never heard, but it's like they are the steps. But the reality for most of us is when we mess up, we deflect. We kind of dodge the stuff. We justify. It wasn't that bad. I didn't mean to. If you hadn't, I wouldn't have. Or we blame, right? It was really their fault. I had to. Back to Mark Manson, I thought he captured this so great. He wrote, doing hard things is a habit that must be practiced, or like all habits, it will be lost. And I think one of the hardest habits for us is to own up to things, to take accountability for the things we've done, to take responsibility. Because what if dissatisfaction and avoidance don't just bring discouragement, but take good things from our life? What if we're losing something in the process of thinking we're saving ourselves? Because the reality is we want the reward and not the struggle. We want the result and not the process. The reality is life doesn't work that way. So what if dead ends and detours provide us an opportunity we wouldn't have without them? What if those things that we think are so bad aren't as bad as we think they are? Because the reality is we are defined by what we're willing to struggle for. To put it another way, what if what we see as a nuisance and an imposition isn't? That's one of those interruptions in life. It's causing me not to get where I want, as quick as I want, as fast as I want, and as happily as I want. What if there's something we need to learn, develop, or own up to? What if that's why we run into a dead end or a detour? Something to think about today.